Welcome to the first of three webinars on diversity and inclusion, sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm Randall Terry. I'm chair of the Department of Biology, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Next week, we will have another webinar on Friday that'll be hosted by Dr. Rebecca Boone. That will be a candid discussion about race and the humanities at Lamar University. And then 2 weeks after that, Dr. Stuart Wright, that's on the 6th of November, that's a Friday as well. Dr. Stuart Wright will be moderating the webinar Black and Brown Lives Matter, a perspective from the social and behavioral sciences. Our webinar today is on racial and gender bias in the sciences. We're going to discuss issues in the classroom, in the laboratory, and in career advancement and beyond. And we have four panelists. Three are from the sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences. We have Dr. Binod Nainabasti, who is an instructor of physics. And Dr. Nainabasti will speak on bias in the classroom. We have Dr. Ashwini Kuknor, who's an associate professor of biology, and Dr. Kuknor will discuss bias in the laboratory and in research. We have Dr. Shyam Shukla, who's an associate professor of chemistry, and Dr. Shukla will talk about, will discuss bias in career advancement and how bias has influenced career advancement to minorities and to women. And last but not least, Dr. Jacqueline Jensen-Vallin will present ways that we might effectively address bias. Generally, each panelist will present on their particular topic for about 5 to 8 minutes or so. I will also interject with short video segments that will dovetail with the particular topics that are being discussed. If we have time, things are going a little slower, I think, because of the electronic format that we're in, but if we have time, we hope to discuss racial and gender bias in sciences and in academia in light of the COVID-19 pandemic at the end, following panelist presentations. To start the program, I would like to introduce you by video to Dr. Esteban Burchard. Dr. Burchard has a joint appointment in the School of Pharmacy in the Department of Medicine, as well as the College of Engineering at the University of California, San Francisco. He has made major contributions in the areas of health disparities, precision medicine, and the promotion of underrepresented populations in the health professions. Dr. Burchard's unique background makes him particularly sensitive to issues surrounding health equity, and I believe he is a good way to start the program because he's the embodiment of diversity in science.
three generations of physicians dating from the 1850s, started in upstate New York, Buffalo.
Apologize for that, but
So can we hear Dell? Can you hear that?
Yes, we
okay,
do.
you can hear it now? Okay, thank you.
this is another in our series of fireside chats. I'm Bob Wachter, I'm chair of the Department of Medicine. My voice does not normally sound like Clint Eastwood, so apologize for that, but getting over a cold. Thrilled to be here with Esteban Burchard, who is a professor in the Department of Engineering and Therapeutic Sciences, which is actually in the School of Pharmacy, but he has a secondary appointment in the Department of Medicine, so we proudly claim him as one of our own. And Esteban is really a world-renowned researcher in genomics and precision medicine, areas around disparities, asthma. We'll get into all of that, but also has really an extraordinary life story. So part of the reason I wanted this opportunity to talk to you, Esteban, was to hear really about both. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let me start off with something cryptic, but I think this will become obvious why I'm asking. Tell us about the meaning of Falls City, Nebraska.
Falls City, Nebraska. Ancestry. Someone found me on Ancestry.com and asked if I was related to someone by the name of Burchard, and I've known that I had some sort of history. And after a little more digging, I found out that I come from a long line of physicians, three generations of physicians dating from the 1850s, started in upstate New York, Buffalo, moved to Nebraska in the 1870s and started a hospital in 1880, and it was financially kicked off in 1920, and they had the 100-year centennial this past October.
So your family comes basically through a long line of people involved in medicine through Falls City, Nebraska, and you found out about it because somebody looked you up on Ancestry.com and contacted you.
That's exactly right.
Pretty amazing. And I saw that going way back, your family tree begins with, this may have been great-great-great-great-grandfather or something, but someone from Germany and somebody from England.
Yes.
And yet I know a big part of your identity is as a Mexican-American, and you've done a lot of your time studying disparities and diversity and issues like that. So when did that connection get made from sort of the European part of your family and the Latino part of your family?
So I was raised Mexican by a single mom, and if I know the answer, I did it on 23andMe and Ancestry. I'm 26% Native American, 8% African, and the rest is European. So I knew that most Mexicans have a significant amount of European as well as indigenous populations. Known that going forward for many years, probably as far back as 2003, but the Falls City was a surprise.
And so tell us about your upbringing. I understand you grew up in San Francisco in the Mission District. Tell us about being raised here.
So continuing with the Falls City, my father was orphaned at the age of 6, given up for adoption, and worked on a farm.
In Nebraska?
In Nebraska. Oh. And that was during the Depression, and was drafted in World War II, served as a pharmacist in World War II, and came out to California and met my mother. My mother was passed away, Mexican farm worker, didn't speak English, learned English, and at the time there was a big push for assimilation. So she married my father. They were separated by the time I was 7. So
what was your father's ancestry?
European.
Uh-huh.
That's all I really knew.
Okay.
Until this past April. Raised in the Mission District, San Francisco. My mom was a school teacher, so hard to raise 5 kids on a school teacher salary in the Mission. And the Mission District at the time was incredibly diverse, racially segregated, very poor population, and great culture, great environment, great weather, lots of gangs. And so my mother was very cognizant of that, and had a network of women that helped raise me to keep me away from gangs.
What does that mean, a network of women who raised you? What did everybody actually do? Did they take shifts and how she set out to be sure that you didn't fall in with the gangs? What was her strategy?
Well, early on, she had other women would take me to a baseball game. They would take me to events and things that normally a father would do. One family took me in particular, a Chinese family. They had two sons, one older and younger than me, and for about 4 years I was with them. Even went to Chinese school here in Chinatown to learn Cantonese. And that was an interesting experience, very interesting. And then I still needed a father figure, and so I was being bused from the Mission District, all Latino and African American, to an all-white high school in the Sunset, and was subsequently kicked out for fighting. I landed in inner city high
How
school.
old were you then?
I was a freshman.
Freshman in high school.
You know, my mom's a school teacher, so it's a big embarrassment to her. I apologize. But I found in inner city school, I found wrestling, and there was a young college coach right out of college that brought a really national level program to an inner city high school, and we went on to the state meet, and I went on to continue and wrestle in college, and so that became my discipline, and I did really well. Took a state placer, took second in California. In college, my coach was African American on the '84 and '88 Olympic team, getting a Ph.D. So I had great role models, and my study partner was African American, NCAA finalist. So I could not have asked for better role models. And that discipline merged with my passion for science really allowed me to focus and run with it.
So my point about showing the video of Dr. Burchard was that perhaps we have biases in what we think a scientist should look like or should be, or their background. Okay. And so the typical sort of scientist, I think, is and we envision this as a white Anglo male who has extensive academic training, who perhaps comes from a very privileged background, perhaps, or at least somewhat a privileged background. And we see a situation here where a scientist, in fact, comes from a very diverse, a very different type of background, who has, in fact, been very accomplished in science and in his career. And so that's the thing that edified me from this particular video of Dr. Esteban Burchard and his life. Our first panelist presenter is Dr. Binod Nainabasti, and he's going to speak to us on bias in the classroom. I'll stop sharing, Binod, and I think you can share now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to make sure everyone hearing me.
Yes.
Okay. In this racial and gender bias in science webinar, mainly I will be talking about bias in the classroom about 6 to 7 minutes. I would like to know what is bias in the classroom, how to identify bias in the classroom, and how to reduce bias in the classroom. My research field, I'm interested in student participation in learning process. Though I spend my several years analyzing student video, I did not, know about bias. I did not recognize that much, but I had some experience. In academic field, there are mainly two types of bias: explicit bias our attitude and belief we have about a person or group on a conscious level. This is straightforward. Everyone can identify explicit bias. An implicit bias is a little bit difficult to understand, and this is also based on attitude and belief that are at the unconscious level, are involuntarily formed, and are in most cases unknown to us. In academic field, in higher available research paper, these are the common statement of implicit bias. And I would like to give you 20 seconds in order to read it. Okay, as implicit bias is difficult to understand, I found one very interesting picture in Wesleyan University page. Implicit bias is equal to just similar to blind spot. Just it is hard to see blind spot and very dangerous. Implicit bias also very dangerous. It has lots of impact in a student's progress, and it's going to hinder our institution mission. As I know I'm going to participate in this webinar, I wanted to explore how can I know biases in my classroom. How can you know students experience biases in our classroom? In order to know, I gave one survey. One of the survey question is, have you experienced in any bias in science course either at Lamar or high school? Why I asked high school is most of the students in my class that I gave survey is probably this is the first science class at Lamar University. There were 123 students. I got received from 81, and this is the result. The yes or no question. 36%. It is a very good number of students is saying they have experienced bias in their science class. This is good number. Therefore, because of bias, they might experience some difficulties in learning process in their high school and college life. I also force students to write down their experiences, and I received more than 100 responses from 81 students. And I would like to share some of them here. Okay, here again, I would like to give you 20 seconds in order to read it. This is the experience students feel in my class. And I completely agree. This is unknowingly happening in my class. And I cannot, in my synchronous class, maybe I'm still struggling how to address. It's not easy. This is the bias in my own class. Let me share 4 more experience here. The first experience is it is a positive bias. And let me read out here. I have never experienced bias in this class because it is online because of COVID. It is hard to experience bias when our teacher does not even know what we look like when it comes to race because we are doing class behind computer screen. But it's not saying directly bias, but that students definitely face some bias when he or she was in real classroom. I have another example here, student and professor relation bias. I have experienced bias in my engineering class. The number of girls is significantly less than men. My professor only asks men for their input unless it is something he thinks will fit a girl stereotype. This is the bias between student and professor. I have 2 more examples. The bias between student and bias between student and institution. The first example here, the bias, I feel like as a girl in engineering, my male classmate as well as my male professor are constantly taking between to me and treat me like an idiot because I'm a girl. There is a gender differences, a gender bias between students and between student professor here as well. Another is interesting. Most of the teacher assistants, maybe student wanted to say teaching assistant at Lamar are female. In my experience at Lamar so far, out of 10 TA, only 1 was male. I feel like if I were to ever apply for a TA position, my chances of obtaining it are lower than a female counterpart. It is the experience, the experience by one of our students. Okay, from this experience, what we can say, there are several types of biases. Bias between students, either gender, racial bias between students, between instructor and students, between institution and students. And these are mostly implicit bias. It's very hard to address. Besides this survey, I have another way to explore implicit bias in the classroom. I generally give students 3 questions early semester evaluation right after first exam. Generally after at the end of the 4th week. The first questions give 2 specific example of things I do that help you learn in class, in lab, on homework. And second question give 2 specific example of things I do that make it difficult for you to learn in class, in lab, on homework. So this 1 or 2 specific practical changes that I could make that would help you improve your learning in this course. From students' response, in every class, I'm going to get some kinds of explicit and implicit bias so that I can think about it. I can eliminate or I can reduce that biases that unknowingly happening in my classes. If you would like to give in your class, feel free to tell me. I'm happy to share these questions. And after having knowledge of gender and racial bias, I would like to add maybe 1 question here. I don't know right now, but if you are interested, let me know. I'm happy to collaborate to find some biases in the classroom. Okay, it is not easy to reduce implicit bias in classroom. And I read a couple of papers, and these 4 points I found in UC Berkeley diversity and inclusion, something a link there, and I like, and I think not that much hard to implement. Cultivate awareness of their biases. If we know biases, we can reduce. Work to increase empathy and empathic communication. Practice mindfulness and loving kindness. Develop cross-group friendship in their own lives. Definitely, there are several suggestions. Once we know the biases in our classes, and if we are mindfulness of that, maybe we can reduce some biases. And the conclusion is lots of biases we need to address. Thank you very much. If you have any question, I'll take later at the end of the session.
Thank you, Dr. Nainabasti. Next, Dr. Kukner will present on bias in the laboratory and in research. See, looking for your screen, Ashwini.
Yeah, I think Dr. Nainabasti has to get out.
Oh. I'm already out.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Let's see, hold on just a moment. Yes, I do.
You do?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you all for showing up for this webinar series. And also, I would like to thank Dr. Terry and everybody in Dr. Maurer's office for providing me an opportunity to speak up on this important issue. My topic today is on race and gender bias in laboratory and research. I have made an attempt to kind of combine both wherever possible, and also to address race and gender at times separately and at times together. Okay, so I start off with the picture that speaks a lot of things. And this was actually adapted from one of the Cell papers, where it was talking about biases against African American scientists. Can you see my shared thing? Because I think it went off for a minute for me.
Yeah.
Something happened there, right?
Yeah, let's try again. Let's see if we can make the connection again. Yeah, it's no longer published. There we go.
Came back up?
Yeah, it came back up. Let's give it a moment.
It's still there, right?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, anyway, my title was like white coats and black and brown scientists, because it involves research and laboratory aspect. So I would like to start off reminding everyone that until this is the data from 2018, the world population data shows that the world population is made up of 49.6% of women totally. And Here you can see in my graphic that it's again spanning across the globe. So this addresses, what you're seeing is a little bit older data than the number I gave you for the population of women. So in any country you pick, developed, developing, whatever you want to classify, you can see that no more than 33% of the workforce in engineering sciences, this data is coming from engineering field, it belongs to women in the workforce. Okay, and then because I did not get a graphic for any other biomedical and life science numbers, I did some digging, and I'm happy to tell you that it's a little bit more, number-wise, it's more in life science compared to the 33% tops in engineering field. But again, I'm not so happy to tell you that it is still way under 50% of the workforce. And this more represents the numbers in all field, engineering and all areas of STEM, wherein for every 5 professionals in research, you find 1 woman among the 5 men. And what is even more interesting is that the next aspect that you see up here, which represents the output, which is obviously measured in terms of scientific research, whether it is publications or grants. And you can see, I love pictures because pictures mean a lot more than words, and so you can see it for yourself. With that 1 in 5 women, you can still see the output like weighing a little bit more than men. And why there are less women, we'll get to that in a minute. But again, these pictures down here kind of tells you the hurdles, because women will get to start off already with a delay in whatever they're doing in terms of career. And I love this graphic right here, which is like a woman in front of the wishing well, wishing for all these things here, and then poof comes an image of men. So that, I mean, yes, it is a cartoon, but it actually weighs a lot more in terms of conveying an important message that is out there. Next, I have some data from the NIH grant panels. And so here, now we are looking at not only women, just I'm talking about the classification based on race. And this graph here shows you the award probability for the NIH R01 grants, the most prestigious one as academics, we all know that. And so you can see the percentage. So yes, they have given a breakup of different races, starting from Black or African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, and the whites. But the important point here is, and again, as all of you know, it's under 30% is the success rate for NIH R01 grants, which has come down drastically over the period of years. However, between the highest number to the lowest number, it is almost 50% less, right? So that's about 15 there, and that's close to 30. So again, these are all like data that's available. And so why is the reason for all these things is, again, going back to what Dr. Nainabasti was talking about, explicit and implicit bias. And this has got to do more with the implicit bias. And so again, this is another study taken from another reputed journal, wherein it actually tells you in very simple way. So what the researchers had done was to ask little kindergartners, little kids under 4 to 6 years of age, to draw a typical picture of a scientist. And at that age, kids are going to draw themselves as a scientist. So the boys would draw male scientists, the girls would draw female scientists. And then as the age they grow up, the age changes, you can automatically see at 10 years old that number of boys drawing female as a scientist already is dropping. And when they reach the age of 16, you can see it's almost nothing. So it's only the girls drawing themselves as a scientist, but the boys are, nobody is going to view a woman as a scientist. Okay, and then if you look at all the published journal articles, and you go by the last author, meaning the corresponding author. So women of underrepresented minorities, as the last author is significantly less. Women as such is less than compared to any other groups. And if you're a woman, belonging to underrepresented minority, it is even more lower in terms of total percentage of articles. And over the period of years, they have monitored this, and this has not changed as much at all. And the next little bit of information that I have here is with regards to conferences. So if you look at international professional development conferences, conferences in your discipline, whether it's national or international, and this study just opened my eyes, because I've been to several conferences and I have never thought about this like that. But if the predominantly male-based organizers are running a conference, the number of female plenary speakers is always very low. And so they, some of the organizations knowingly switch the roles and put women as the organizers, and all of a sudden you can see so the percentage of female organizers of an international conference or a national conference goes up. Now female speakers get more prominence, and more of them get invited to go to these conferences. So again, these are all addressing implicit bias directly. And last but not the least, the PhD, a number of PhDs coming out in the STEM field. So that's measured by the student paper submissions. This, of course, was from 2 years ago. The data was from 2018. But you can also see in this case, it's talking about both the things, gender and the race right here. So you can see the women is stacked in the middle, so it's not considering the race there. But when you look at underrepresented minority, it is even way below women. So, but all these little snippets will really tell you that, yes, there is implicit bias in every aspect. So that has led to several group of people who are passionate about this concept, and they came up with a term that most of you already know. They call it a leaky pipeline model, and it's very popular for when you talk about women in STEM, and that's where they coined this leaky pipeline model. But then if you overlay the data of underrepresented minorities and fit in this pipeline, it is no different. It is exactly the same leaky pipeline leading to, so here are some of the reasons, and that's why I gave the title that the leaky pipeline for both women and people of color. So you can see that women are less likely to be employed as grad students or postdocs in male PI labs. Again, these are proven data, okay, and which also goes along with some of the underrepresented minority students as well. There are several papers independently confirming some of these points that are shown here. Women are half as likely to get excellent reviews and recommendation letters compared to the rest. And this one is very true in all big R1 research institutions, where startup funds for male PIs are significantly over and above what the female PI would get as a startup grant or startup funding from the institution for research. Women are able to submit fewer grants. Again, primarily you saw those two little cartoon images of taking care of all other things over and above the professional demands. Females are, as last authors, I showed you the numbers there. And in general, so this is referred to as the leaky pipeline model. But how do we plug these leaks, right? How do we block this? So do we just patch it up right there, which will still break? And that is what a lot of us are trying to do, is to, yes, we know there is implicit bias and we try to do our best, but how is that best enough is the question I think that all of us need to ask. And here are some of the things like that these group of authors were coming up with. How can entire STEM community address this gender bias problem? And I can include also the racial disparities problem right there too. So collect and publish the data on gender representation in our own institution, like Dr. Nainabasti was saying again, like in our classes, in our department, in our college, in our institution. So we have to start somewhere, and that's where we need to start, I think, and have some clear and specific goals and guidelines to address this gender and minority representation in our area. Up next, I have data that is directly related to the undergraduate research. So this data is looking at success. So in the legend, it says majors and leavers. So majors are those students that successfully completed the undergrad in their chosen major. All of them are STEM related. Leavers are those that could not, they even either gave up or did not complete their undergraduate degree. And so you have the breakup from men, women, white men, white women, underrepresented men and women. And so you can see the blue lines are representing people that stuck on, and the students that completed, and the green ones were the leavers. That's not the main point here. The main point is this: all of this percentage was collected over pursued professor care. So this is where in the laboratory setting, like as faculty, as professors, the relationship with the students and how much you care matters. So this is with respect to the first the bar graph bar here representing white women. So you can see there's not that big of there are some levers, but compared to whoever stuck through, the gap is not that much. But what is significant here is so these people that these women that left the leavers group here did not. So you can see the percent reporting professor care was almost 80%. So 80% felt that they all got good care, and whatever the reason they left was not directly attributable to the professor care that they received. But look at this number right here. For the interest of time, I'm going to jump into just this one here, underrepresented women. And you can see already the finishers are down to 60%. I mean, even though they finished, their professor care perception was only up to 60%. And those that did not even make it from there to here, the drop, you can see the perceived professor care by major status, race, and gender issues. So again, this will tell us that it's that implicit bias. Maybe it's not all conscious, but it is all unconscious bias that would make someone perceive that this person is not going to care for me. So it's both ways, I feel, from the faculty to the student and vice versa. So why do we have to talk about all of this? I think the three reasons why gender and racial diversity is crucial to science, which is backed up by a lot of scientific data, will be that scientific research is more accurate when gender and race is considered. For the simple explanation purpose, as an example, whether you're studying a seatbelt design, you cannot just use men and design it and then say, oh, we can just scale it down to women, right? That's not how it is done. Okay, heart disease. We look at men and then, okay, we can just extrapolate that to women. No, that's not how it works. Perception of pain for men and women. So so you can talk about all these independent research aspects and see that it's not that. So you got to have inclusiveness there, and you have to consider women as women, underrepresented minorities as them, and then ask your question. Okay, women and minority. The other reason why I am addressing this issue is important is women and minorities bring unique perspectives to any kind of research and scientific conversation. Diverse teams will always lead to a better idea and better approach, in my opinion. And we need more STEM professionals, including both gender and race. Even though the numbers have slowly started to rise, however, there is a discrepancy among the number of underrepresented minorities and women who are coming into the program is okay, because there are so many programs and so many initiatives that have been designed. But what's still lacking is the output. Like, they are into it, but then will they get out, and what happens next? Okay, so that is where a little bit of effort should be put into, I think. And now I'm switching gears a little bit. And so far I talked about gender and race in scientists themselves. Now I'm talking about gender and race and ethnicity in research aspect itself. That's something like what Dr. Brouchard was talking in the beginning. So here's the schematic showing disparities in cancer research. Again, the same thing. You study a typical male, or maybe most of the times it's white male, and then you get the biopsy studies, chemotherapies, name anything. All those are going off of one individual or one group of individuals, and then you go up to clinical trials, and then when you actually apply it to the population or the endpoint from lab to bedside, none of that is going to matter, because this individual that you started with is completely different. Genetic wise, socio-cultural types and ethnicity and their practices, everything, right? So we need representation right there itself, and that is where science is a little bit lagging, especially in the field of biomedical sciences. And because of those kinds of implicit bias, all of us know very well about the Tuskegee syphilis study and whatnot, and that notion. So you would think that that was, if anything, that was a lesson to somehow for us consciously remove this unconscious bias or implicit bias. But then not too long ago, which is in April 2020, this COVID has put this issue to light big time, right? It is in the limelight right now. And so this kind of got my attention back then in April itself, and I had to go dig back for this information to be presented here. And so this was coming from two French physician scientists who were just casually talking about, so I quoted one of them here, it's their quote. So they're saying that, oh, shouldn't we be doing this study in Africa where there are no masks, no treatments, no resuscitation, a bit like as it is done elsewhere for some studies on AIDS in prostitutes. We try things because we know that they are highly exposed and that they do not protect themselves. So this happened on a live television in a discussion, like in an interview. So they're talking about using tuberculosis, the BCG vaccine against COVID-19. And so why not do that in Africa? So I mean, in so many levels, to me, I think this is a good example of an implicit bias, like really, really good example of an implicit bias. So going along the same lines for COVID, so here's the numbers. The numbers are glaring at us. The racial and ethnic disparities in the rates of infection and death, and the amount of care they get if you are under especially one particular group, African American group, is taking the brunt of the burden right here. And so I think all this is screaming out and telling us that the systematic injustice in scientific research and healthcare and medicine has to change, and we have to do something in that aspect. And from there, I'm going to end by talking about the latest trend in biomedical research, which also Dr. Brouchard mentioned. I heard individualized medicine. And so people are trying to use artificial intelligence so that to rule out in the hiring process, in the selection of people for clinical trials and all these aspects. Okay, and so I'm pretty sure some of you must have heard about this, and there was a big backlash on AI, and so you can read some of the language that's written right there that came out after the initial study. Okay, the concept of precision medicine or individualized medicine, and they made use of artificial intelligence and all that. So even those AI programs, artificial intelligence programs too, exhibited racial and gender biases. Okay, and again, we have to ask the question, the machine, it is machine learning, and the machine can only work, and the machine is only good as the teacher, So when you train the machine to do something, again, if there is an implicit bias there, that translates into whatever algorithm is written. And there's another a neat little study about word embedding. And so what they did was they used the AIs, robots, and then trained those to recognize words like female and race and whatnot. So it's pretty interesting for race. If you put female, the machines will automatically line up the words saying cooking, kindness, caring. Okay, and if you put men, it says work, profession, job. So what more evidence you need to feel this implicit bias that we have all around us? And so I'll end by saying, like, what are the actions that one can take, or each one of us can take as a scientist? So one is to seek diversity, to recognize that as individuals we do have implicit bias no matter what, and then so we need to understand and be aware of what are these types of biases that we might have. And make a conscious effort to be inclusive of those who are underrepresented, and share in the responsibility. I believe this big time. So everyone plays a role in promoting diversity. It's not just the job of that one female on a committee, that one female in the department, to take the burden and to champion for this cause. It has to come from every member on that committee, every member in the faculty, every admin in the university setting, I think. So it has got to be a shared responsibility, and resist and reduce the effects of implicit bias. And if you feel that there is an implicit bias, then you got to speak up, and you got to at least educate and encourage your fellow members to be aware of the bias itself, and see diversity as an investment in good science and for the development, for the improvement of mankind. And I leave you all with this quote that I love from Maya Angelou: "We are only as blind as we want to be." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuttner. A lot of information there. So can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Sure. Okay, I'm getting a little feedback here, but lots of information there, and lots of valuable perspectives as well, based on your experience. So that's very informative and very salient presentation. Is Dr. Shukla in the room? Dr. Shukla?
I'm right here. Hello, how are you?
I am well, Dr. Shukla.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I was told that I have about 5 to 8 minutes, and I will try to keep that timeline. And I really appreciated Ashwani bringing out so many points. And implicit bias, it is implicit. And in past, I have been at Lamar for 35 years, and I have been to many other universities, Ivy League and otherwise. I do not find any major differences in the intellectual or cognitive abilities of gender or race. We are very similar. However, what happens? As we look around us and in higher position, there are not as many female or minority people. So there are problems. And to take care of those problems is one of the things is any problem in bias in hiring. Well, as I see it, there are many studies which say there is no blatant bias in hiring. But what Ashwani was just pointing out, that right from the beginning, encouragement of the student for underrepresented people, the representation, they are not encouraged. We are not grooming them. So what happens at the end, at the time of the hiring? Well, how many applicants do we have? So this problem has to be beginning somewhere where we continuously keep on producing a product which will fulfill the needs of the people. So, in terms of hiring, I do not think there is any blatant bias. However, we can always improve. And one of the things that I see is like in a book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, is paradigm shift. If I change place with Ashwani or Jacqueline, how would I feel if somebody does that something to me? Just for a moment. Is it responsibility of some female or minority in an organization to carry the flame? Answer is no. We all have to realize, first of all, that there is a problem and what we can contribute. Not a single person can help to do this thing. I like to talk to students. And when I talk to the students, I find they start to open up. And then I find that encouraging them, as Ashwani's slide was pointing out, that yes, we can. And there is a sentence which I like very much. And that sentence is, we wait for the light, but we behold darkness. We are waiting for light. And we are holding on to what? Behold the darkness. And also another sentence is along that line, it's better to light one candle than stay in the darkness. We as Mother Teresa also said, whatever problem she sees in front of it, let's take care of it. And that maybe on global scale, we cannot do a whole lot. But in individual scale within our vicinity, if we start to clean up, probably that will go a long way. Now, history is full of injustices, and I have a whole list of the injustices. And some of my favorite people are Madame Curie. But there is a good news in Madame Curie also. Madame Curie came from Poland in late 1800s to work in Paris. And Pierre Curie will not see her. For what reason? Dr. Nainabasti, Ashwani, both have pointed out she was a female. And he avoided to see her many times, but she was persistent. And that's one of my messages that I like to see, the persistence. She persisted. She met Madame Curie, and she met Pierre Curie, and she went on to get 2 Nobel Prizes in science. So as we go along and we see in 20th century, and Nobel Prize is a way to measure our, success in a profession. So if you look at around the distribution of Nobel Prizes, it is so highly skewed. We have about 76 billion people have lived on Earth. In past century, maybe 20-25 billion. Only 608 Nobel Prizes have been awarded. 58 of them are won by women, even though they are half the population, but only 58 out of 608 women got the Nobel Prize. And when you look further, out of 58, that only 23 were in science. When you look at out of those 23, only 6 are in chemistry, 4 in physics, and 12 or 13 in physiology. So number of Nobel Prizes are so much smaller. However, so you come to the 21st century, and the data that I have from 2001 to 2020, 28 women won the Nobel Prize. And in the list of Nobel Prizes, by the way, among the women are 58. How many black or I don't know people are there? In science, 0. Hispanic, only 3. So why is that disparity? What are we doing wrong? Anyway, so Nobel Prizes distribution, but the good news here is, or better news, I should not say good news, is in 21st century, beginning at 2001, 28 women won the Nobel Prize. 28 women. So things are changing. They are going slow. There are many leaky spots we need to fix, undeniably. But things are changing. Now, coming to minority, if you look around, and as for the injustices, there are a whole lot of Liz Meitner, the Harvard computer, the ladies who did the calculations and showed the size of the universe is so big. These ladies, the Harvard computers as they were called, they were supposed to work in the basement. In the Northeast, you always have a basement. You were not allowed to go upstairs. Why? They were women. These are the icon. I don't know if you can see the picture, but these are the group of the women. Only one male. The lady who discovered pulsar, her name, she did not get the Nobel Prize. DNA structure, Watson and Crick got the Nobel Prize. What do you think, Ashwani, happened to the third person who was really instrumental? If you see Liz Meitner is the person, second graduate in physics in 20th century, second woman to do PhD. She did the fission work. She was not given Nobel Prize. So it has been, there have been a lot of injustices, but now let's move from injustices to what are we doing better now. If you look around minority and a whole list of minority, I will start taking the name, and the names are, who is chief of Pepsi? Indra Nui. Who is chief of Google? Sundar Pichai. Who is chief of Microsoft? Satya Nadella. Who was chief of National Science Foundation? Was Panchanathan. Bell Lab chief Arun Netrawali. Indian mission to Mars was led mostly by women. So they have a whole lot to contribute. And by the way, one of our local, actually he was from India, Behrooj Setana, who was Dean of College of Business and went on to succeed as a president of some colleges. So there are success stories. And these success stories should be encouraging us to look into the problem and find some solution. One of the things that I feel is happening in case of women and minority, and I just saw in Wall Street, I think you can perhaps see it on your thing, and I will read it for you. Why the career sacrifices women make during the coronavirus pandemic could be long-lasting. Women. And now why is it coming to women on most of that, disproportionately? Because a lot of women do take care of the families. Are we providing some kind of and there is not enough help for these people to take care of their families. So in our setup, I think we have to create, like as Ashwani's slide was pointing out, the care, mentorship, just not mentorship, promote them. Promote, like one of the problem, like writing the letter of recommendation for women and men, there's a big difference in letter of recommendation. You see the letters for men written as exceptionally or star performer and things like that. Women have letters written, oh, she is very good. Never as strong as it is for male. So we have to, those who have seen the life, who have seen the things around, we should be helping to promote, mentor, encourage, talk, to know the people. I'm from, my accent tells me I'm from different background. I like to joke with people. I have come to know people. And you find in the core at the bottom, I have yet to find a person who is so drastically different than me. Once you start talking. So maybe communication. We look at some different color person, somebody looks at me as Indian and says, oh my God, something, you know. So anyway, means things are happening. There are biases in implicit or explicit. Explicit we can remove. Implicit bias, I was talking this morning and I said why the width of the road are only so much. This is the same width as from the Roman Empire. So we never thought about it. So implicit bias is something like that width of the road. We never think about it. We should re-examine our and encourage, work together. And this is not a problem of one person. It is our problem. And as Dr. Martin Luther King said, we are part of a problem or we are part of a solution. Where do we want to be? And I'll stop here. And
Dr. Shukla, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lots of valuable perspectives there. based on a great deal of experience. I'm also happy to report, Dr. Shukla, that there were 2 women Nobel laureates this year.
The
I think
physics,
it was in chemistry, I think.
chemistry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I'm just saying that there was 2 this year in chemistry for their work on a technique called CRISPR-Cas9, which is really changing biochemistry and molecular biology in many different areas, medicine and other areas of science as well. So valuable contributions there.
It's actually, if I may, Dr. Terry, if I may say, it's a phenomenal contribution. If I have a privilege, and probably you have a little bit privilege of, I have seen life for 69 years. I did not have fax. I did not have telephone. I did not have a computer. So imagine how things were done. Ingenuity of the people was there. But number of samples, so many people need to be tested. How do you test all those people? So their contribution of these 2 ladies have gone so far that I cannot even fathom that how deep and how far it is. Ashwini, I don't know if you agree or disagree. It seems like, you know. So yeah, so I appreciate you making pointing this thing out, and
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
Dr. Jensen-Vallin?
Let
me see if I can get your PowerPoint up. Let's see.
If you can't, I'll try, but I can always ask. Do you like Dr. Shukla and go without? So,
let's see.
So listening to everybody has made me think a lot about what I'm about to say, and some of it is reiterating points made by some of our other speakers. We'll see if the slides come up.
Can you see it? You have them
Not
now?
yet.
Okay. I think they're live.
You see the whole collection of them instead of individual ones.
Mm-hmm. Let's see.
Oh. I can go without. We can just skip the slides. It's fine. In the interest of time.
It's on now. It's on.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Next slide would be great. So in preparing for this, yesterday I posted to social media, Dr. Terry, if you can get to slide number 2, this thing in red. I said, okay, my female identifying academic mathematics friends, because I knew I was the only mathematician on the panel today. And I asked them, what have you experienced? What one thing has made it difficult for you to remain in academia, or what has made you leave academia? And there were lots of comments. It has been up for almost 24 hours now, and I have about 90 comments, people sharing stories, people asking questions. They boil down to really 3 big issues for women who entered academia and have decided to leave or are struggling with staying. They are disrespect or language used to refer to them. This can be by students or by colleagues, by administrators, by whoever. Explicit or implicit sexism or outright harassment. I don't know if you would be shocked or not shocked by the number of women I know who say that they've been inappropriately touched or propositioned by a colleague or a potential research partner or something else. And then another very big one is lack of support for childcare or mother duties, and this has already been mentioned today. So I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about each of those. I know we're over time, so I'll try to be coherent but brief. Can I have the next slide, please? So a lot of people, especially when women are in positions of power, and this could be in your classroom, or this could be in a faculty meeting, this could be if you're chairing a committee, this could be if you're department chair or dean, people will frequently speak over them and not give them a chance to finish their sentences. They will reiterate their point, even if it's already been acknowledged. They will have their knowledge questioned. You know, you can justify why you made a decision that they made, and people will say, well, that's not really, you really don't understand the situation, and the woman will have to readjust their explanation. And so one of the things I'm asking for everybody to do, and this is male, female, everybody is to kind of think about how you talk to women in your field and how you talk about them. The how you talk about them is a sign of your implicit bias. And of course, how you talk to them can be a sign of your explicit bias sometimes. But language matters a lot. You know, one of the frequent complaints from female faculty, female instructors, is that they are not addressed properly in the classroom, that students will call them like Miss by their first name, or just by their first name. They won't use a title. They won't show them some sort of respect within the classroom. Those things come a long way, and having that modeled by colleagues in the department really helps that situation. Can I have the next slide, please? This came up on social media a few days ago, that somebody is serving on a hiring committee. There's a school out there that's managing to hire this year somehow in mathematics. I don't know how. And she was explaining to her colleagues also on the hiring committee that there are certain things that appear in a cover letter because you've had the appropriate mentoring. And there are certain underrepresented populations which might not have had the right mentoring to know that a cover letter is better received if you actually mention the name of the school, if you mention people who work there, if you mention, if it's a research university, mention your research first, if it's a teaching university, mention your teaching first, and if you customize your cover letters. But not everybody is told this. You have to have access to the right mentors, the right people. You have to be supported in order to even get your foot in the door for people to look at your cover letter. And she was explaining to the other people on the hiring committee that if you look at the CV, this person is clearly very skilled in their area. They have several papers, they have research collaborations, they've already given invited talks. Like, this is a person we would want to work with us, and discounting them because they didn't have the right mentoring to write the kind of cover letter that we expect, whatever that we is not going to enhance the diversity of our department, and it's not going to bring in the best candidates necessarily. Can I have the next slide, please? So Dr. Kuknar was mentioning the leaky pipeline kind of for students and for entering the profession, and it continues within the tenure stream. And this stat was very shocking to me and very telling, so I wanted to bring it up. 43% of women, as compared to 23% of men, leave their full-time STEM employment after having their first child. And this doesn't happen necessarily, it doesn't happen at the same rates for women without children or men without children. It's often seen that parenthood is a choice, is a lifestyle choice, as opposed to something that maybe happens to occur at the same time that you're in the tenure stream. And so women in particular have to make very difficult decisions about whether to start a family at a time when they want to start a family, perhaps, which coincides with their tenure decision. And that can be a very tricky situation. I know lots of people who've waited to have children until they've had tenure. I know lots of people who've put off tenure because they were having children. As a matter of fact, next slide, please. So a lot of places say, well, it's okay, we'll just pause the tenure clock for you. And that is not always as good of a solution as we think it would be. You would think like, oh, that year just doesn't count for you or against you, you get an extra year. However, in places where parental leave is also available, men spend more of that time off on parental leave, actually managing to follow some academic pursuits, than women who have a similar leave policy. So there are also many situations in which that year is like not officially held against you, but others in your department might say, well, you had an extra year, therefore you should be further in your research program. And they don't necessarily give you the kind of credit that you think you might get when you have that delay. So we need to be careful about these accommodations and how we talk about these accommodations within our department, within our college, within our greater academic area. Can I have the next slide, please? So this came up earlier. We want to work on ourselves first and think about which kind of biases we have. Supporting other people can transform you, and it can transform them, as Dr. Shukla mentioned. Like, paying that extra bit of attention can make somebody's experience very different, and it can move the needle, right? It can help us keep somebody in the program, in our department, in our college, who might have left otherwise. That personal connection can be super important. So you have to acknowledge what you may or may not have as an implicit bias, and then you have to be conscious of that to the point where you're having conversations with other people about those potential biases that you're noticing in yourself and therefore noticing in other people. Can I have the next slide, please? And this also came up. I think Dr. Shukla also mentioned this, like as we're writing about each other, whether we're writing letters of recommendations for students, for colleagues who are going up for promotion or tenure, for grad students entering the workforce or seeking postdoc, we want to be very conscious of the language that we're using. Women are more likely to be mentioned as being caring or group workers or things like that, and men are more likely to be classified as like strong, independent, and those things can affect how they're perceived. If you have to talk about a PhD in any STEM field and you have to qualify that person as intelligent, you're probably not, it's probably not necessary. That should already be implied by their degree and their other qualifications. It's much better to talk about their other qualifications. I've noticed that a lot, that PhD women are often mentioned to be intelligent or smart or whatever, and it's just, you're obviously not addressing your implicit bias. Can I have the next slide, please? Other language that is important to notice is that there are qualities that we look for, which are typically seen as male qualities, that when women have them, they're actually downgraded for having those same qualities, and those qualities are frequently tied to leadership. Abrasive, aggressive, women and many underrepresented minorities are taught that they are not to act from an emotional place. They're not allowed to argue emotionally, that you have to be calm in the middle of a disagreement or an argument, or you will be taken less seriously. We want to be careful about the language that we use when we talk about, is she abrasive? Is she brusque? Are those okay for him, but not okay for her? How do we standardize that language and those expectations? There's a bunch of examples at that shortened link there. Can I have the next slide? We also want to think carefully about the service workload, and Dr. Kuchner mentioned this as well. I think that we all want to work together on all of these issues and increasing diversity in support of our female and minority students and faculty and colleagues. If that one woman in your department is being asked to serve on all the committees so that you have a female representative on all the committees, then you're overworking her. And the same thing for your Latinx or your African American or any other underrepresented minority who might be in your college or in your department. We need to figure out ways to represent them without asking them to do all the work. So it's just not fair. It's not reasonable. We can't ask them to do that plus all the other things that they need to do in order to maintain any quality of life or professional advancement. Next slide. We can also support those colleagues and expand our worldview by making sure that when you need, and again, Dr. Kuchner mentioned this, if you have people involved in the organizing of talks or conferences or speaker series who maybe are not part of the majority, then they are more likely to find people from underrepresented groups to participate, and they're more likely to invite those people. So the more you extend your social network, the more you get to meet quality colleagues who don't look like you, to not put too fine of a point on it. And last one, I think. It's absolutely true that articles, again, Dr. Kuchner had some really great data, so I'm super glad that she got to go first. There's lots of data about female authors being underrepresented, especially in high tier journals. Double-blind refereeing helps. Think about that for journal articles, for grant submissions, maybe even for hiring. Like, you don't need to know anything about the candidate except for their qualifications when you go through your first round of making your shortlist, right? We don't really need to know that much about some of them. There's a great video, and Dr. Terry can share the link at some point, about giving the same CV and cover letter out and changing the name from John to Joanna, and Joanna is ranked lower than John is, and John's offered more money for the same job, even though it's literally exactly the same cover letter. It helps. And okay, there's one more. And if you are wanting a million other ideas, the link on the next slide has 122 ways that you can increase diversity in your department. And I will stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jensen-Vallin. Let's see. Lots of practical advice for how to address bias, and particularly as it pertains to career advancement. Dr. Jensen-Vallin referred to a particular study that I had a video for, but for the sake of time, I'll just tell you about it. One of the incipient studies for looking at bias in hiring practices was done in 2012, a fairly recent, this sort of study where they submit an application and a CV identically under two different names. And this study in 2012 was done for a lab manager position. And the names were John and Jennifer, but other than that, identical CVs. And John was consistently viewed, this is a sample size of 127 different faculty that evaluated these applications for a lab manager position. And John was consistently viewed as being more competent, okay, more hireable. They also made recommendations for salary. I think John made $4,000. They suggested that John make $4,000 a year more than Jennifer. And they also suggested that they would provide mentoring, preferred provide mentoring to John relative to Jennifer. And this was for a lab manager position in 2012. They extended that study to postdoc position, looking at postdoc positions. One key thing about the study in 2012, though, was that both male and female faculty showed bias against female applicants. And so perhaps a clear example of implicit bias, and several of our panelists have spoken about the dangers of implicit bias, not the least of which is, by definition, it's something that we're not aware of. And so developing techniques, okay, for identifying implicit bias in ourselves, okay, is certainly one of the take-home messages that has come out of this particular webinar. And so the dangers of implicit bias, it's just my personal opinion that explicit bias is the tip of the iceberg, and this mass below the surface that we don't see is probably implicit bias. So quite often when we think of someone being biased, we're not thinking of ourselves, of course. We're thinking this is something, a characteristic of others, which is a characteristic of implicit bias itself. And so I think this was mentioned by Dr. Shukla quite skillfully, this idea of increasing self-awareness. What do we know about ourselves in terms of our bias? And I think Dr. Jensen-Vallin made a very good point in that we can just a simple self-check is to ask others about ourselves, someone that you are comfortable with and that you know will tell you. So it's this process of seeking, it's this process of self-discovering, trying to know what we can about ourselves, especially as it pertains to our own biases. I'm very thankful to all of our panelists. Okay, thank you, all of you. I'm thankful for the college, Dean Maurer, Gary Richards, and Natalie Rhodes helping us with the technology, okay, sort of coaching me through the technology. I'm grateful for the participants. We have two other webinars that are coming in the future. And so this is a very valuable exercise, I think, and we mentioned the idea that everyone has to be responsible for addressing bias. I would add to that, we need to have a consistent approach long-term to addressing bias, both gender and racial bias in the sciences, throughout the college, throughout our university communities. And so I would encourage everyone to commit to that, everyone in the community to commit to that. Thank you. I'm grateful for your participation. Thanks to all the panelists. Okay.
We want to thank you also for doing a great, summary, and the presentations were very nice. And we need to continuously, as you summarize, we need to find the darkness within us.
Thank you so much to all.
Thank you. Have a great day. Have a nice
You
weekend.
too, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.